how do we build a group of properties
Glad you would
based on your
ask.
spreadsheet Olympics?
Glad you would ask. And if I was only a little bit more of an Excel wizard, I would have pulled it up by now with the screen share. But I've been put into my place, and
You're an Excel wizard, not a Zoom wizard. We know this.
okay.
I'm the
I
Zoom
don't know
wizard.
the
Look
difference
at me.
between the
The Zoom
two.
wizard. I'm the Zoom
All
wizard.
right, guys. So let's talk about how we would build a portfolio for a $250,000 investment. A client came to us. We came to understand that 250 is the right amount for them to invest. So I'm going to show you that. First thing though is let's talk about why is it important to get to 3 properties. When I see 250,000 for the client bringing it over, I immediately think, okay, great. We can start this client off. We have a really good chance of starting this client off with 3 assets. 3 is a really important number. And it's because number 1, I want you to last in this asset class.
Mhm.
And one of the most important things for lasting in this asset class, being here for a full market cycle, is having an asset, having a portfolio that's diversified. You know, Pablo, you have 3 properties.
I
Well,
do.
you have 3 properties. You have
I've got
more than
5,
that,
yeah.
right? You live in the
Yeah,
duplex,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So as an owner of rental properties, is there really ever a time that there's not something going on with your rental property that might have maintenance or vacancy?
Yeah, yeah, I've actually been through a nice little,
Okay.
I feel like I've been through a nice,
Don't
like,
get too comfortable.
year and a half, 2 years where, like, that hasn't happened, but there is also times where something is happening at one of my properties, for
Yeah.
sure.
You know, you start to get to 3, 4, 5
Yeah.
properties and you've had a really nice run. So
I've had a nice run.
I love
Yeah.
that. But at some point, you start to feel like, listen, there's always something little
Yeah.
that's going on with my asset. You know, and then over time, one of your people, one of the families in your home leaves, right? The end of their lease comes, there's a property turn, maybe there's a life situation. Something is always going to happen.
Mhm.
And what you want is to get into a situation where you have other assets that are performing just like they should and actually overperforming at that time because there is no maintenance and vacancy at that time
Mhm.
to be able to buffer or buoy the other asset. And this is going to become normal for you for the clients who own multiple assets. You know, I'm sure you can chime in and say, listen, the reason that I don't get really bent out of shape when I have a property turn is because I have 7 other assets that are all producing a lot of positive cash flow. And it's just kind of like a carousel is the way
Mhm.
I think about it with my own portfolio, right? And then it helps me just manage it based on numbers rather than emotions. So I want you to get to 3. If you have the opportunity to get to 3 right off the bat, we're going to definitely advise you to get there because that seems to be just a nice starting point for where diversification really happens.
Mhm.
Other things to consider, the incentives are usually bigger when you get to more properties at one time. So this incentive that I just shared with you is available for any number of purchases, but that's unique. Once this incentive is over, we typically have an incentive for buying 3 or more at one time.
Mhm.
And so you can maximize incentives that way. And then you can also reduce your property management fees. It's called the JWB Elite program. So once you get to 5 assets in your portfolio, we drop your property management fees on every asset you have with us, every turnkey asset from 10% down to 9%. And then when you get to 10 properties, we actually drop it down to 8% again. So all these things, when we see 250 or somewhere around there, we're saying to ourselves, okay, cool. How can we be able to financially engineer this in a way that we can get to 3 properties in that initial property recommendation for you?
Got it. Okay. So you got 250K. You're gonna try to get to 3 properties or more.
We are.
Okay.
We are.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So now for this one, you know, we've got all 14 assets, but here, you know, I really have to think about a lot of things when I'm going to financially engineer this portfolio. I need to think about how I'm going to adjust for not just return on investment, not just for budget, but there's going to be some combinations of assets where we might actually want to put in a negative cash flow property into the portfolio. So I wanted to so let's kind of talk about that for a second. Actually,
Yeah.
let's talk about
Well,
it.
that's what we just talked about, right? Like if you're already building in a for portfolio, if you can build a portfolio where 2 of them are so cash flow positive that the third one can be cash flow negative, but the overall cash flow positive of it covers that cash flow negative, but you can still juice the returns. That's
That's what we
essentially what
do.
we're doing, right?
We should be happy to take on a cash flow negative property if and only if our overall return on investment
Mhm.
is higher by doing that.
And within the passive bucket, your cash flow is covering that piece,
Exactly.
right? So
Exactly.
your passive income bucket is cash flow positive beyond just the like single property cash flow negative.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So because of needing to kind of like see all of that, we're going to take a look at all 14 at one time. right? Just to make sure that we're looking at this together and that I'm not missing anything. It's not one where we want to just limit it to the top 5 or 6 because there's a little bit more financial engineering that's required here.
Okay.
All right, so we've got all 14 here again. We're going to come back and let's see.
Do we want to keep this at 25% down, or we want to go up to 30% down?
Well, you know, what I would do if we were starting this over and this was behind the scenes preparation for our call, I would put it at 30% first, and then I would go down to 25%. But because we just went through that exercise and I saw that there were a lot of properties at 25% that were cash flow positive, I'm going to kind of give us a little cheat code here.
All right, Brady.
All right, there we go. You said I was Romo, right? I can't be.
You are Romo.
I'm not Brady
of show hosting. You're Brady of Excel sheets.
But what was the
Don't worry about
Brady?
it. Let's just keep going.
All right, here we go. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a look at 25% down. We're gonna focus on our max rate of return. We're gonna take a look at our cash flows to make sure that they're positive, and we're all gonna make sure that this fits into $250,000 out of pocket. So, all right, so here's what we do. First thing I do is I run scenarios. So now I'm looking at what is the lowest out of pocket is one scenario. And what would my cash flow be and what would my rate of return be? Then what would be my highest cash flow scenario? So I'll choose a few properties because of that. And then what would my highest return on investment scenario be? Now, obviously, if my highest return on investment scenario also gets me to the budget, then we would, and the cash flow was positive, then we would do that. Okay. Doesn't typically work out that way. So what I'm trying to do now is to take it from 14 properties to limit it down to maybe like 6 or 7 or 9 or something like that. Okay. All right, so we're going to go through a few scenarios. First thing we're going to look at is lowest out of pocket. So here's where our initial investment is. And I've got one of these at 60,000. We've got one at 57,000. We've got one at 60,000 out of pocket. And we've got another one here at $69,000.
Am I taking notes on these names?
I put a couple of notes here, but yeah, okay. We've got the property at 5th Street. We've got the property at Bridle Avenue, and we've got the property at Moncrief Dinsmore. Okay. So with those properties, right, I'm going to include this because I might need this budget to be able, this low budget to be able to put it into the 3 property portfolio. But when I'm looking at the cash flows at 25% down, they're not cash flow positive. If I was to put this portfolio together, my 10-year cash flows for this portfolio would be, what's that, -7? No, that would be -$16,000.
Okay, not great.
Then we're not setting you up for success.
Yeah.
But the goal here is how do I limit it from 14 to get a lower number that I can kind of analyze through. So, all right, so we got those 3. Now let's go with the max cash flows. All right, so here we've got a couple of $6,000 properties, 5,000. Okay, cool. So now we've got 3rd Street, Cocoa, and Rio Grande. Those are the max cash flows with 25% down.
Okay.
So my initial investment here, let's see how much out of pocket. That was Rio Grande and that was Roselle. So my out of pocket here is $275,000. So again, not going to be the combination that we want. But now I say, okay, if I need to pull some cash flow to offset a negative cash flow in another portfolio, here, this is why I'm choosing those properties to put in the mix. And then lastly, we're looking for our highest return properties. So we've got Rio Grande here, we've got Roselle at 11%, and then we've got 3rd and Cocoa here. Now I'm going to try to limit it to 3 here, and I see that Cocoa has 90 grand out of pocket, but it has the same return on investment. This one on 3rd is 98 grand out of pocket. It's the same return on investment. So I'm just going to choose Cocoa because it has a lower out of pocket and it has the same ROI. Okay. So we've got Cocoa, Rio Grande, and Roselle to add to the list there. All right. So now we're going to take the 14 assets and we're going to drop it. We're going to just choose the ones that we just identified there. What do we got?
Rio, Cocoa, Roselle.
All right.
And then 5th Street.
Okay.
Bridle and Moncrief.
And Moncrief Dinsmore. Okay. Cool. So does that make sense as to how, like the goal behind taking those scenarios?
Yeah. Okay. You're basically going and picking for like the very top of returns and the very bottom of like down payment.
Yeah.
Right? Returns and cash flow and down payment.
Exactly. And I'm looking at cash flows as well because I know that that's the second most important criteria there, right? But the odds that we're going to find our best combination is very high that it's going to be within those scenarios. So, all right. So now we've got that. We've got these 6 properties to take a look at. Now we just start looking at this together and saying, okay, what's the best combination? So I'll start with returns. We see Rio Grande here, 72 out of pocket and positive net rental income. Really good chance. And we know that Rio Grande was our property selection no matter what, or on the first one. But if we didn't know that, really good chance that we're going to include that in the portfolio because, we've got on average about 80-ish grand out of pocket per asset in order to fit the $250,000 total out of pocket. So I'm looking at that and I'm saying, well, there's a really good chance there. I'm also looking at it and saying, you know what? I've got $7,000 of positive net rental income to play with here, right? Meaning I might need this to offset a negative in order to get to the 3 properties. Now I'm looking at Roselle. It's 11%, but it's got a significantly higher initial investment, $104,000 out of pocket. That's going to be pretty tough for me to put into this portfolio. It has high net rental income, but I'm looking at that and I'm saying, I don't know if that's going to work. And then we've got Cocoa here. We know from our previous scenarios that running all 3 of these will be too much of a budget. It's actually $200 out of pocket. Our budget's $250. So I know that that's not going to work. So now I'm going to start mixing and matching based on my order of priorities. Max return on investment, secondary is cash flow, and then third is budget.
Got it.
All make sense so far?
Yeah, all make.
Okay. So let's start to mix and match. All right. We've got Rio Grande here at 72. Let's see what Cocoa is at 90. And let's see if we could add the next highest return asset here. And we've got Fifth, right? So Fifth is $69,000 and it's the highest return on investment. So we have a sum of $231,000 out of pocket.
Okay.
That's good.
Yep.
Right? Our max was 250. Now we're at 231.
Yep.
So we've also understood that this is the highest return combination that we can find as well, right?
Yep.
11.3, 11, and then 10.1. We are not able to include the Cocoa property because that one...
That would take us over the deposit.
That would take us over the deposit, right? Now let's start to take a look at what our net rental income is. So we've got positive net rental income on Rio Grande and Cocoa. I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you. Rio Grande, Cocoa, and we've got negative on Fifth. But our total portfolio, positive cash flow.
Yeah. Weren't we looking at Rio Grande and Roselle and then Fifth?
Yeah. What were we looking at? We're looking at Rio Grande,
Roselle, and Fifth.
Rio Grande, Roselle, and Fifth. Sorry. There we go. All right. Yes. So that one's actually at 246, right? We are under. But you know what? Now, I don't remember what we were just looking at, but I don't think that we can run the scenario here, but I don't think that that's going to get us our highest return on investment.
Okay.
Because, well, actually it would. You're right. There we go. Yeah. Because we've got 11% here and 10.1. There we go. So,
I just followed your formula.
Yeah, you did.
Like I looked at the ROIs, 11.3 and 11.
There we go.
And then those are the 2 highest from the high down payment size.
Yep.
And then I looked at the 2 highest from the low down payment. I looked at the highest from the low down payment side. And then I went over to net rental income and I just kind of like did some quick math and realized that close to $7,000 or 6,300 minus 3322 would make sense. And then I looked at the total investment and I just added up 7,204, 68 and came out to like 230.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, the sum is actually 246.
Well,
yeah,
this is just rough math.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. You did it exactly right. So we're under the 250 threshold, and you can see now that we've got net rental income positive for the entire portfolio, right? So now we're positive about 10 grand for net rental income, and then so what we do here, we got Rio Grande, Roselle, and Fifth. Boom, 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 bing, bang, boom. Rio Grande, Roselle, and Fifth, and there we go. Now we've got a portfolio that has 246 out of pocket. Our overall rate of return is 10.9%. It's weighted for our entire portfolio. And now we've built a portfolio that's going to deliver positive cash flow over the full 10-year horizon. And we maximized our incentives. We got closer and closer to reducing our property management fees from 10% to 9%. We diversified. We did it all.
I love it.